everyone, welcome back. I'm doing a tutorial on this collars, etc. the bodice dress pattern. And first I'm going to be ironing these pieces out. I will put in the description below where I bought this pattern. It's from Farmhouse Fabrics, and I will put the link in the description below. The fabric is also from Farmhouse. I love Farmhouse, but it's not a sponsored video from Farmhouse by any means. I just love their stuff and their service. So for the collar that I'm doing view A, and that's the little fancy collar, and you're supposed to trace it. That way you're not going to stretch the fabric before it's sewn. So here I am tracing with a water soluble marker. Then go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces just like normal. Align them on either the cross grain or the straight grain, whatever your fabric calls for. And for the skirt, since my fabric is terrible, I much prefer that method than cutting it or doing the rotary thing. It's just a lot more accurate and it's a lot faster. So I just measure the length of the skirt that it's supposed to be, and then I'll cut the width of the skirt later on. So one of the cool things about Farmhouse is they will run these specials. If you spend $30 or $40, whatever their amount is, they will give you a free gift. In this case, it's 3 yards of French lace trim, and I'm using this trim to outline the collar as well as the sleeves. So I didn't cut any sleeve bands, I'm just cutting lace instead, and I will show you how I apply that later on in the video. This is how I do darts. I've been doing darts like this forever. I cut little slits in the bottom of the darts where those two lines are in the bottom, and then I just put a pin in the top. It will leave a little hole in your tissue paper, but that's alright, at least in my book. Then I will fold the fabric over and align those two little notches at the bottom, and I will use the pin to make sure, I'll pull on the pin and make sure that I am in line, and then I'll iron the dart down. Then you go on and you're going to sew all these darts. I start at the bottom of the dart, and then I will taper off to the top, and I'll remove that pin and just place my finger where the pin was. So once your darts are done, you're going to iron all of those so they lay flat. And to assemble the bodice, you're going to take that bodice front and put the bodice back on top of that. Then you're going to sew at the shoulder seams a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you're done sewing those shoulder seams together, you're going to open those up and press them flat. Of course, you can do whatever view you like from the pattern. I chose to do view A, that has the more fancier collar on it. I've also done this pattern omitting all collars and just done it with a plain neckline, and that looks fine as well. But anyway, I'm doing view A this tutorial, and this is the lace insert that's going to go between the lace that I showed earlier, that lace trim from Farmhouse. So this is called lace shaping, and basically you use this board to pin down your lace, and then to make the lace lay flat, you pull the thread from the lace header until your lace lays flat. At the corners, you're going to do a little miter, so you'll pin it at the corner and fold it back until it creates a little miter, and you'll go and do a zigzag later on to make that miter lay flat. I'll show that zigzag later on in the video. So once you have the entire thing pinned to your board and it's all laying flat because you've pulled the lace header, now you need to change your pin so you can remove it from the board. So you just take the pins out and then lay them flat, and this is what you'll have once you're done with all of that. Go ahead and change your thread to some lighter weight thread. This is 80 weight. Anytime you use lace, you want to use lighter weight thread so it doesn't show as much. And you're just going to go nice and steady, slow. You're just going to have to be patient with this. You do a little bit at a time, put your needle down, turn, a little bit at a time, put your needle down and turn. This is the focus point of the dress, so you don't want to rush it. You want it to look nice, and you want it to be done correctly. So just have patience. If you're having one of those days where patience is not coming to you, leave this alone for another day. Walk away from the sewing machine. So once you have all of that lace zigzagged on there, what I'm doing, my iron right now is cool, so I'm just basically using it as a water bottle. I really need to get a spray bottle. It just hasn't happened yet. So I'm basically just using my iron as a spray bottle to remove that water soluble ink from earlier. Once that's done, just give it another iron on top of it and iron those miters so they lay flat. Once all of that is done, you're going to go back and trim off that excess fabric. Obviously, you're going to want to be careful not to trim into those stitches that you attach the lace with. Then you're going to go back to the ironing board and do another pass of the iron. Again, making sure those miters lay flat. Here's how I do the miters. This is a zigzag stitch as well. And you're just going to go right on top of that fold. If this was more of a severe miter, I would have trimmed some fabric away so that it wouldn't have been that bulk, but there isn't any bulk in here, as you can see. So once you do all of your miters, you will have a collar that looks like this. Then I'm taking that lace that I got for free from my purchase from Farmhouse, and I am gathering it by pulling that thread from the lace header. And you can see that if you just keep pulling, it'll just keep on gathering. And so I'm pulling and I'm pinning and pulling and pinning and pulling and pinning until I like how it's looking. Then I will pin it to the lace and remove it from the board so I can go stitch it down on the machine. Again, I'm using a zigzag stitch, and you're going to want to make sure to enclose both lace headers, the lace header from the lace insert as well as the lace header from that gather lace, into a nice neat stitch. When you're done with all of the lace, you can go back and do whatever embroidery designs you like. I actually went with the pattern this time. I don't know, I wasn't feeling making up my own, so I went with the pattern. And yes, I know this is a huge big mess. If you follow me on Instagram, you can see that I have plans for an organization in the future, and I need to work on my dovetails some, and then I'm going to be making a little embroidery floss organization box. So it's in the future. So once I'm done with all the embroidery, it looks like this, and the back of your embroidery should look just as good as the front of your embroidery. It should be, well, it should be just as neat as the front of your embroidery. It won't be quite as pretty, but it should be just as neat. So just take your time and enjoy it. So the fabric on the collar around the neckline hasn't been removed yet. I'm leaving that in there on purpose because I don't want that neckline to stretch out before I've had a chance to sew it onto the fabric. So once I'm done sewing it on the fabric, then I'll go back and cut that excess fabric away. Then you're going to take the lining of that bodice and flip it right sides together with the front of the bodice. And once you have everything lined up, you're going to be sewing from the back all the way to the neckline and then to the other back. And this is a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Then you can go and trim up that seam allowance for the neckline as well as those corners that make the transition from the back to the neckline. And you're also going to want to put in a couple snips around the neckline so it lays flat. Then put 2 rows of gather stitches into that sleeve. I like a 2-row method, that way you can put your permanent stitches in between the gather stitches and your gathers will lay straight, if that makes sense. They won't go crooked on you. Then change your thread back to that 80 weight thread. I'm going to do a little entredeaux detail going down the sleeve. It's completely optional. I was just in the mood for some entredeaux down the sleeve. So I'm doing a little zigzag on each side of the entredeaux. And then when I'm done, I'm removing that fabric so it's just the entredeaux and there's nothing else behind it. Now adjust your gathers on the bottom of that sleeve until they fit the lace trim for the bottom of the sleeve, and then just run a zigzag to attach the lace to the bottom of the sleeve. For the top of the sleeve, you're going to do another 2 sets of gather rows, and once you have your gathers in and it's matched and you've matched them up to the dress, you're just going to attach the sleeve to the dress right sides together, 1/2 inch seam allowance in between those gather threads. When that's done, you can remove both of those gather threads. You just pull on them and they should come right out. Then you can trim those edges up so they're nice and neat. And I like to come back and do a zigzag so those edges right there are enclosed and they won't unravel over time. You can also use a serger. My serger's in the attic collecting dust, so do the same 2 rows of gather stitches for the skirt front, and then just pull on those gather stitches to adjust the gathers to the front of the bodice. Once those are adjusted, right sides together and stitch in between them. Then iron that flat and the front of your dress will be done since the bodice will be attached to the skirt. Now you're ready to work on the skirt back. The skirt back is going to have a casing down the top portion of that skirt. So in order to find center back, I just fold my fabric in half and I iron a crease down the middle, if that makes sense. It's plenty accurate enough for what we're doing. I use that crease to know where to cut, and I just sort of eyeball it of how long to cut it. I'm sure you can look in the pattern and get an actual dimension. Then I just snip to create a strip of fabric, and I know this strip of fabric is going to be longer than what I need. I do that on purpose so I don't really have to think as much. So you're going to sew the strip of fabric onto the back of the skirt with right sides together. I like to have the back of the skirt facing me as I sew these two pieces together. That way I can see the bunches that are going to be created at the bottom of that skirt. So I'm just putting my needle down, I'm adjusting the bunches, then I'm putting my foot back down and sewing some more. And I keep doing this until I get out of that bottom of the casing. Then you can snip the very bottom of that casing free to relieve that tension, and then you can trim at the edges of that seam. Then you're going to go to your ironing board and fold over that casing strip like 1/4 of an inch, and then fold it over again 1/4 of an inch. That way you have a finished seam at the back of your skirt casing. And then at the bottom of that casing, at the very bottom, I pinch the two together, and then I just run a couple of stitches so that casing lays flat. And you can see here it's laying flat, and I just have the rest of the casing strip pinned because I'm going to do my handwork later on. I like to do all of my handwork at the end of every project, so I just keep it pinned until then. Attach the back of the skirt in the same manner as you attach the front of the skirt, making sure not to catch that lining. When you're done doing that, you can tuck the lining under and pin it to the front of the skirt as well as the back of the skirt. You just tuck it under, iron her down, and pin her in. Like I said, I like to do all of my hand stitching later on, so I just pin that down for now. So I'm using French seams to join the side seams. In order to do a French seam, put your fabric wrong sides together. Make sure that you have the seams for those sleeves facing down. Since this is a puffy sleeve, you want those sleeves to face down. That way it gives a little more poof at the top of the sleeve. Like I said, right sides together. You're going to sew maybe 1/4 of an inch from the raw edges. Once you're done doing that, go back and trim up those edges and iron the seam flat. Then turn the dress insides out and press that seam so it's flat. Once you're done doing this, you go back to your sewing machine and sew on the inside of your dress, starting at the bottom of your dress. I found that if you start with the sleeve, your machine can kind of just eat your dress. So I still always start at the bottom of the dress, and that seems to work for me. Once you're done with both of your French seams, then you're ready to do your hem. Generally, I do a 1/2 inch up, and then I will take up whatever additional length I need to in the next fold. But I do that 1/2 inch just so that edge is a finished edge there. And then in this case I'm doing 3 inches. I'll pin it 3 inches, I'll move over some, and I'll pin it again 3 inches, and then I'll iron the distance in between the two. That method seems to work well for me. It's pretty easy and it's fairly accurate. Once you've done all of your hand stitching and you added the buttons for the back or snaps, whatever you prefer, your dress will be done. I hope you all enjoyed. If there's any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. Thanks again for watching.